You find comfort in familiar places. The path you walk every night, the quiet corners of your town. You believe you know them, that you're safe there. But what happens when you get the feeling you're not alone? When a new shadow appears, and you realize it's been watching you all along. Last October, my friends and I decided to go to a pumpkin patch just outside of town. It was one of those perfect fall afternoons, right after school let out. The air was getting that sharp, cold edge to it, and the leaves were this incredible mix of burnt orange and fiery yellow. We'd been planning it all week, just a simple, classic autumn thing to do. The place was called Henderson's Family Farm, a small but really popular spot. It was bustling, families everywhere, little kids shrieking with laughter as they ran between the rows, and the smell of cinnamon and baked apples hanging in the air from a little cider stand. We parked, grabbed one of those rickety red wagons, and headed into the thick of it. There were just seas of pumpkins, every shape and size you could imagine. We walked down a few rows, picking out some decent ones. Everything felt completely normal, comfortable even. Then my friend Dylan dared me to go get the biggest pumpkin we could find, pointing toward the very back of the patch where it bordered a dense little wooded area. I laughed and said, sure, why not? The path back there got narrower pretty quickly. The further we walked, the quieter it became. The happy chatter from the main area just sort of faded into the background, replaced by the sound of our feet crunching on dead leaves. I remember noticing how thick the trees were, and how the shadows were getting incredibly long in the late afternoon sun. The wind was picking up, making the leaves rustle in a way that sounded almost like whispers. I told myself I was being stupid. When we finally got to the last row of pumpkins, I saw something that made me freeze. Just behind the pumpkins, right at the edge of the tree line, there was a figure. My first thought was that it was just a scarecrow someone had set up for decoration. It was standing perfectly still, wearing some kind of wide-brimmed hat, and its arms were stretched out to the sides, almost like a cross. But the longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. It was too thin, too gaunt to be a scarecrow stuffed with straw. And then I saw the hat move, just a tiny bit, like a person taking a slow breath underneath it. Do you guys see that? I whispered, my voice barely coming out. Dylan turned and squinted, but then he just shrugged. It's probably just a decoration, man, he said, not sounding convinced himself. I wasn't so sure. A cold, heavy feeling was starting to settle in my stomach. I grabbed the biggest pumpkin I could lift, trying my best not to stare at the thing by the trees. It didn't move. It just stood there. We started walking back, but I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder every few seconds. The figure looked closer. I told myself my eyes were playing tricks on me, that it was just the angle, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Dylan saw how I was acting. "Stop looking back," he said, trying to laugh it off, but his voice was a little tight. I didn't want to, but I forced myself to face forward. When we reached the edge of the main patch where you could see the stand and the other people again, I risked one last look. The figure was gone. A wave of relief washed over me, and I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just some guy in a costume, or someone walking through the woods. We headed for the stand to pay. The path took us past that wooded area again, and by now the sun was almost completely gone. The shadows were thick and dark. That's when I heard it. A loud crack, like a heavy branch snapping underfoot. Dylan didn't seem to hear it. I stopped dead in my tracks. "Did you hear that?" He shook his head, looking annoyed. I turned, slowly, and my heart just stopped. The figure was there again, but this time it was only about 15 feet behind us. Its arms weren't out anymore. It was just standing there, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if it were studying us. Then, without seeming to move its legs at all, it began to drift forward. It wasn't walking, it was gliding, floating silently over the carpet of dead leaves. I grabbed Dylan's arm hard and just yelled, "Run!" We bolted toward the stand, the pumpkins rattling in the wagon. I could hear the leaves crunching behind us, faster and faster, a dry, skittering sound that didn't match the thing's smooth movement. When we burst into the lit area by the stand, surrounded by people, I looked back. The figure had stopped right at the edge of the darkness. It just stood there and watched us. We paid for the pumpkins without a word and threw them in the car, peeling out of the parking lot. I didn't look back again. I know what I saw. It wasn't a person in a costume. The way it moved, it wasn't human. When I was 12, I was in the 6th grade. The school I went to, Northwood Middle, was directly across the street from this old, beat-up house that honestly gave me the creeps even back then. It just looked neglected. The paint was peeling in long strips. One of the upstairs windows was boarded over, and the yard was a jungle of weeds. I could never understand why someone would let their home look like that. Whenever I walked home with my friends, they'd make jokes about it being haunted. I'd always tell them to shut up, that the owner might hear them and get mad. Of course, they'd just laugh at me for being a scaredy cat, which, to be fair, I was. I've always had this irrational fear of confrontation with adults. Passing that house was fine when I was with them, but once October rolled around, things changed. My friends all stayed after school for various clubs, so I started walking home alone. It started about the second week of October, the first time I walked home by myself in a while. As I passed the creepy house, something felt off. I glanced over and saw someone standing in the front window, perfectly still, just a tall, dark silhouette, seemingly staring right at me as I walked by. It freaked me out, but nothing else happened, so I tried to brush it off, but it kept happening. Every single day, as I walked home from school, that same person was in the window, watching me. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. It was just a shape against the dim light of the house. I was terrified. I told my friends, and they just shrugged, saying it was probably someone trying to pull an early Halloween prank on me. I wanted to believe them. A week before Halloween, I was on my usual walk home. This time, the silhouette wasn't in the window. It was standing on the porch. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I tried to act calm, to just be brave, and walk past, like I didn't see them. That was a mistake. As I drew parallel with the house, the figure suddenly launched itself down the porch steps and started running straight-o at me. I screamed, a raw, terrified sound, and just took off. I wasn't a fast runner, and I could hear them gaining on me. It was definitely a man, judging by the guttural, nonsensical things he was yelling. It wasn't words, just angry noises. I knew I had to hide. Up ahead, I saw an alleyway between two buildings and ducked into it, scrambling behind a foul-smelling dumpster. I pressed myself against the cold metal, trying to control my breathing, praying he hadn't seen me. I could hear his footsteps slow down, then stop right at the entrance to the alley. He was mumbling to himself, a low, constant stream of gibberish. My heart was going to beat its way out of my chest. Then I heard him walking closer, his steps echoing off the brick walls. He was so close I could hear his ragged breathing. I was sure he was going to peek behind the dumpster and find me. But then, just as suddenly, the footsteps turned and ran away, back down the street. I stayed crouched there for what felt like an eternity, my body shaking, until I was sure he was gone. Then I ran the rest of the way home. As soon as I got inside, I broke down and told my parents. My dad called the police. They showed up about 20 minutes later and had me go over everything, what happened, and which house the man came from. They said they would check it out and give us an update. The next day, an officer came by. He told us that nobody lived in that house. It had been officially vacant for over 5 years. He suggested it was probably a squatter who had gotten spooked and moved on. Nothing was ever done. Even now, at 22, I can still see that figure flying off the porch, and I still get a knot in my stomach whenever I pass a house that looks abandoned. I'll never forget what happened that October. My parents had divorced a couple of years earlier, and we didn't get to see our mom nearly as much as we wanted. So when our dad arranged for me and my 3 siblings to visit her for a weekend, we were ecstatic. My older sister, I'll call her Sarah, and my 2 younger brothers, Ben and Leo. My mom lived in this old brick apartment building in a sketchy part of Pennsylvania, right off the interstate. A lot of buildings were crammed together, but it always felt strangely empty, desolate. Her apartment complex had this long, dark alleyway that ran alongside it, which also served as a kind of back entrance. You wouldn't find the place unless you knew to turn down that specific alley. Her apartment was on the 2nd floor, and it was so cozy and warm, filled with soft furniture and quirky decorations. It felt safe. Her downstairs neighbors had kids our age, a boy and a girl named Alex and Maya, who we'd become friends with on previous visits. That day, we were all playing in the parking lot next to the alley. Tag, kickball, the usual stuff. But since it was October, Alex suggested we play hide-and-seek outside after dark. It sounded like the perfect spooky game. We all agreed to meet up at 9 p.m. Night fell fast that time of year, and the tall lampposts cast this rusty orange glow over the parking lot, leaving the corners of the building in deep shadow. It was perfect. Alex was the seeker. Everyone scattered. I stuck with Sarah, my older sister. We ran into the long alleyway, heading for the large garbage bins at the very back of the building. We figured no one would think to look that far down. As Alex's voice echoed, "Ready or not, here I come," the game started. At first it was thrilling, hiding in the dark, but the excitement wore off as we just waited. The only sounds were the distant hum of the highway and the wind. I was getting bored. "Maybe we hid too well," I whispered. Sarah laughed and said we should probably just forfeit. We stepped out from behind the dumpsters into the middle of the alley, and that's when my blood ran cold. Standing at the far end of the alley, framed by the streetlight, was a figure. It wasn't anyone I knew. This person was unnaturally tall, and the light from above cast their face in a deep shadow. But I could see their hair. It was a cheap, garish rainbow afro wig, matted and dirty. My mind screamed, "Clown." The clothes confirmed it. It wasn't even Halloween yet. The person just stood there, completely motionless, staring right at us. Sarah saw it too, and pulled me back. "We need to go find the others," she whispered, her voice trembling. We hurried back down the alley and found my brother, Ben, and our friend, Maya. Ben was confused why we were just walking around. We tried to explain about the weird clown at the end of the alley. We were still technically in its line of sight, so we pointed to show them. And that's when the situation escalated. The clown was closer now. It was slowly waving at us. We could see its face better. It wasn't makeup. It was smeared black grease paint, like a void where a face should be. The only things visible were its eyes. Suddenly, Maya screamed. We spun around, and she pointed. "There's another one." She was right. Standing by the corner of the building was a second clown, this one with scraggly green hair and longer, spindly legs. We didn't wait. We ran. Maya and Ben sprinted for their apartment, and we scrambled up the stairs to ours. We found our other brother, Leo, already there, talking to our mom. She pulled us into a hug, and we realized she already knew something was wrong. Leo told us he'd been hiding in the courtyard when a clown had looked down at him from over a bush. He ran and found Alex, and they both went to tell his parents. We thought it was over, but later that night, I woke up thirsty. As I was getting water from the fridge, I heard a sound from the living room window. A faint, rhythmic tapping. Stupidity took over, and I went to look. I couldn't understand how someone could be tapping on a second-story window. I slowly lifted the blinds, and I came face to face with the clown, the same one from the alley. Its black, featureless face was pressed against the glass, its eyes fixed on me. I screamed and ran for my mom. When she came out, it was gone. Of course, it was gone, but she believed me. I still don't know how that person got up to the window, and I'm glad all they did was watch. I come from a rural part of the Czech Republic, an area where old traditions die hard. My country is still very Christian, so Halloween isn't a big celebration here. Older folks tend to see it as something dark, even satanic. Still, you'll see pumpkins on porches, some even carved into jack-o'-lanterns. It was late October, and I had a routine of taking my dog, Luna, for a walk every evening around 9 p.m. Luna is a large, powerful dog, and she gets agitated by kids and cyclists, so night walks were just easier. In the fall, it gets pitch black here very early. There's this small road I love to walk. It leads from the village supermarket near my house to an old church, maybe a 10-minute walk. On one side of the road is a dense forest, and on the other a large horse stud. At night the path is almost always deserted. I loved the atmosphere, the cold breeze, the sound of leaves crunching under my boots, the feeling of complete solitude. I was walking like that, lost in my own thoughts, approaching the end of the road where the forest meets an old, dilapidated stable that belongs to the local parish. It hasn't been used in decades. Suddenly I was jolted out of my thoughts by Luna. She started barking ferociously, a deep, guttural sound I'd rarely heard from her. I looked around for another dog or a person, but she was focused entirely on the old stable and the trees behind it. The streetlights in that spot are dim and ancient, so it was hard to see anything beyond the immediate tree line. My dog was going absolutely mad, barking, growling, pulling so hard on the leash her harness was creaking. This was not her usual behavior. I peered into the darkness, trying to see what had set her off, and then I saw it. Maybe 20 meters away, just behind the priest's stable, it was the silhouette of a man. At first, my brain didn't want to process it. I thought it had to be a strangely shaped bush, but the longer I stared, the clearer it became. It was definitely a person. He was wearing all white, his clothes reflecting the faint moonlight. He was kneeling, his back perfectly straight, not hiding but not in plain sight either. Just there. A chill ran down my spine. I realized he was wearing some kind of white robe. He wasn't moving a muscle, just kneeling and looking in my direction. I pulled hard on Luna's leash, trying to get her to move, but she was planted, refusing to budge. I told myself I was not staying there 1 second longer. I grabbed her by the harness and practically dragged her away, walking as fast as I could without breaking into a dead run. I didn't want him to know I'd seen him. The church was only a minute away, and I saw a few people standing outside it. I thought about telling them, but what would I say? That there was a man kneeling in the woods? It sounded insane. The rest of the walk home was the most nerve-wracking of my life. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced I was being followed. Even Luna was different, walking quickly with her head down, not sniffing around like she usually did. I got home without any more trouble, but the story doesn't end there. Late that night, I was woken by the sound of multiple sirens. They wailed for what felt like an hour. The next morning, the local news reported that someone had set the priest's old stable on fire. The town gossip was that it was drunk teenagers, but I knew what I had seen. The person in the woods wasn't a giggling teenager. He was disturbingly calm, serene, as if he were waiting for something. What bothers me the most is the time gap. At least 5 or 6 hours passed between when I saw him and when the fire was reported. Was he kneeling there that whole time? What were they doing? I'm just glad he never acknowledged me, and that Luna didn't pull us any closer. And so, these stories come to an end. But some questions linger. How can you ever be certain you're truly alone, even in the places you know by heart? Share your thoughts and theories. I read all the comments. See you in the next one.